Good God. I mean, you caused chaos. The chaos came to you. There's a lot to get into. I gotta start with you're at tribal council. Rome stands up, uses his steal a vote on you. Give me your reaction to this between the confusion and was there a feeling that eventually settled in of like, oh, could it be me tonight?
Oh, immediately you're like, wait, is this how a blindside happens? Oh shoot, is that what's happening right now? Whoa. It was pure shock. I truly it was 100% a blindside. Did not expect that to happen at all. So when he read my name, I'm immediately like, what conversations happened that it switched like this? Like I'm like trying to be like, who did this? Like Genevieve wrote like Teeny? Was it you? Like who was it? Like who spilled the beans? So it was immediately in that moment I knew when he said my name that it was gonna go down as it's gonna be against me. It was more of a realization of like, holy cow, it's happening. Like, wow.
Well, speaking of realization, I want to talk a bit about pre your final words to the tribe, where you are just sitting there and you outright mention Genevieve, saying, I trusted us three. Was there any tactics behind that, or was that just pure emotion, still in abject shock that, as we'll get into, she ends up turning the tables on you?
That was pure shock. Like there was no strategy. Like I don't think at that moment, if you can think strategy, props to you. You're an incredible human for being able to separate that much. No strategy in that moment. It was purely like I was truthfully hurt. I was very much like, wow, like I truly trusted you, Genevieve, because like I thought we had a very close bond. I thought we had a very tight relationship, and um, in that moment, you're just like, okay, connecting the dots of like, it must be you. Like you're the only one who was the initiator of this plan, and it's just like, wow, I'm sorry, like that you did this to me.
Well, let's start walking through your game here. And I got to start with your number one, the only person that was left out of that vote with no vote in Teeny, because when we talked in the preseason, you said, there's this person, TC at Ponderosa, giving me nothing. I'm not sure how to feel. Obviously, you got everything with Teeny once you actually hit the beach. Talk to me about how that dynamic came about.
Yeah. All those pre-Ponderosa like vibes and everything are just vibes. Like again, mean nothing. Like you're just like, who's smiling at me? You have nothing to go off of. It's just like, who am I getting a smile from today versus not? Who maybe looked away? The moment you get on an island, you speak to them, you understand who they are, where they come from, their experiences, you really start to create that relationship then. And like all those preconceived notions, really kind of leave your head because you're like, wow, like you're gonna gravitate who you gravitate towards. So Teeny and I immediately, we just clicked. Like everything that she said, I was like, yes, yes. Everything I said, she was like, yes, yes. Like it was just like immediate, like we're just firing on all cylinders together. I adore her. She's just such a wonderful human being. So yeah, she never smiled at me at Ponderosa, but we were all vibes and smiles together on the island.
Well, smiling together, you were able to serve in the middle of this like odd three duo dynamic over on Lavo.
Yeah.
So I got to ask, obviously, now looking back at last week's vote, I mean, the choice to side with seemingly Genevieve and Rome over Asia and Saul, it was presented to us as Asia, not wanting to vote against Saul. It was pitched as, okay, Rome has all of these advantages. Was there another reason as well? Give me sort of the rationale behind why you chose to side with that pair for the vote.
Yeah. So truthfully, Teeny and I were like smack in the middle as you can get of 50%. We were super tight with both Genevieve and Rome, as well as Saul and Asia. Um, it's often not shown how close our relationships were to both of those pairs, but equally strong. And that's why even when I said like at the third episode, core four, it was an intentional statement. It was truthfully to make sure that both duos know that, hey, we're still with you, and to trigger that to make sure no one plays a shot in the dark. Because I just wanted to solidify, like, hey, I'm with you too. Like, you know
Hmm.
it. We've talked about it. Um, the decision to go with, the Asia vote, we ended up going. So me and Teeny, we sat down and we're like, hey, we have a branch point. Which duo do we go with for this first vote? Which side? Rome carried a lot of power. Rome had an advantage. He had an idol. We knew Rome wasn't going home. We knew he was going to play it. We also knew he wasn't going to play it for Genevieve. Rome never specifically said he's going to play the idol for Genevieve. That
Hmm.
was something Teeny and I made up so that we could then work with Saul and Asia to kind of like create a split vote. That was something we created. Rome
Oh.
didn't think of that. Rome was never going to play his idol for Genevieve. Rome's going to play it for himself. We knew that. So we knew Rome's safe. So then it's like, do we vote out Genevieve or do we vote out Saul and Asia? Then we thought, okay, who do we feel personally closer to? And this is again something that isn't really shown is I, as well as Teeny, had a super tight bond with Genevieve. I think
Oh.
one of the only times I cried on the island when I was sharing personal details was with Genevieve. I was every single time we made a decision, there was a three-person alliance, which was Genevieve, me, and Teeny. We were
Oh.
super close. So we were making decisions together and we had premeditated and we've talked about this before of being like, hey, when we get the chance, we'll vote out Rome. Like we know that he's a big personality. We'll do it. This was discussed way before. Genevieve said this before too. She's like, wow, he's a big
Hmm.
personality. We need to get him out at some point. Like we need to do this, working with us. So in that moment, we're like, okay, she's working with us. We know Rome's a powerful person. Makes sense. We need to keep her for now. And it's like Saul and Asia. We're like, okay, well, at this point, it just comes down to who's going to work with us once we vote out the other person. And that's when that conversation of like, hey, Asia, are you willing to vote out Saul came into play? Because at that point, we loved Asia. Again, I said this at the end. I adore Asia. I think she's a brilliant person. She's such a kind human being, awesome human being. Like, I really wanted to work with her and have her stay there. But when
Hmm.
we had that conversation, she's like, no, like, why would we vote out Saul? It was just like, okay, she's not going to work with us. She's going to be really mad. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Versus Saul, we asked the same question to Saul, and Saul was like, sure. Like, he was like, yeah, he was like, I mean, I don't want to, but if I had to, yeah, I'd vote out Asia. And we're like, okay, cool. We know who we're voting out. We're voting out Asia.
That's so interesting. So then, yeah, I mean, you mentioned that it seemed like it was already kind of a premeditated plan for you to turn on Rome. Were you always planning to do that as soon as the Asia vote happened? Because it seemed from
Yeah.
our perspective that you were taking, this opportunity in this moment, but it seemed like that was always going to be the logical next step.
That was always the logical, that was the pre-discussed next step was when we get the chance and we know Rome does not have an idol, Rome's going out. That was it was discussed so freely amongst the remaining people on the tribe that it was just like, okay, like I think we even saw it on like the first day or the first episode or the second episode. It was like, all right, everyone was saying like we need to get out Rome, we need to get out Rome, but then he had an idol. So everyone knew that we couldn't get out Rome. So everyone was like, okay, this is the next step. This is the next step. I was just the one who said
Yeah. So then,
it.
how do you now getting the ability to watch back how Genevieve was reacting to you throwing out her name perhaps as a decoy to again turn Roman Saul against each other? Obviously, from our perspective, again, something that really kind of spurred her forward to get rid of you. What's your reaction to that? Was that something that you picked up on hindsight?
So again, that was a lot of not a lot of content that wasn't shown
Hmm.
into that decision. So when Rome and I are sitting there and trying to be like, hey, we need to give a decoy vote to Saul. Rome initially, so we're like, hey, okay, what about you, Rome? Like that makes the most logical sense. And Rome's like, no, no, not me, not me. Like, why would it be me? Like, it shouldn't be me. And we're like, okay, well, that was the most logical step. And then he's like, what about you? I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like Saul likes me. Like he wants to continue working with me. Like I've had a conversation with him at this point when we're on the island of like, hey Saul, let's work together. And like he's like, yeah, I mean, I don't have anyone else to work with. Like I'll work with you. We've maintained a good relationship still. Like we had already discussed potentially Asia being the vote. Like he knows
Hmm.
that this may have been coming. So he kind of expects it and he's still wanting to work with us. Like so we're like, okay, why would Saul want to vote me out? And then we're brainstorming and we're like, okay, what about Genevieve? I say that because there's only two other people left on the island, Teeny or
Hmm.
Genevieve. I'm like, okay, what about Genevieve? And Rome's like, that could work. And I'm like, okay. What's again not shown is that I immediately go to Genevieve and be like, hey, Genevieve, FYI, we're using your name as a decoy. Rome and I came up with this together. It wasn't my decision. We're coming up with this. Are you okay with it? Is it fine? asking permission, being like, "Are you fine with this?" And she's like, "I don't want it." And I'm like, "Okay, this is the explanation that we came up with." I'm like, "Rome makes sense. He doesn't want it. He said me. That doesn't make sense. Your name makes sense because Saul doesn't like you and Rome." And she's like, "Yeah, that makes sense. Okay." So she's agreeable with it. So in my mind, it doesn't make sense. That's not when her wheels got churning. I think her wheels got churning when I'm guiding all these conversations and
Hmm.
making the vote happen. And I think she's like, wait, Kishan's not just like a middle background person. He's actually making decisions. I think she finally realized that even with like the first vote, it's kind of shown that like Rome may have decided who we're going to vote for. Teeny decided. Teeny and I made every single decision together. We were the ones that are like sitting down, having these conversations, and like, okay, who are we picking? Who are we picking? And then we just went and told Genevieve and Rome, we're like, hey, the vote's gonna be Asia. So
Hmm.
I think she finally connected the two that I'm a lot more involved in these decisions than she thought. And I think that's when the wheels were like, oh shoot, okay, let's get out Kishan instead.
And maybe one of those reasons is it also, from our perspective, seemed like you were the one that was maybe helping widen the gap a little bit between Rome and Saul. Talk to me about what the temperature of that relationship was like at camp, because certainly we were experiencing it and it seemed to run quite hot, and your own sort of role in maybe propping that rivalry a bit.
Yeah. So I do say I didn't just build one fire on the island. There's another fire that was built, which was the relationship that is Saul and Rome. And it kind of started immediately from the first moments that we were on the island. Saul's off looking for firewood, like, and as well as like bamboo. He's doing what he does, provide. He's trying to like get everything that he can. Rome is also off looking for stuff, which is idols, not really helping the tribe. We both know they're both off. However, they each come back individually to Genevieve, Teeny, and I, and they're like, "Hey, where's this person? Hey, where's Saul? Hey, where's Rome?" And it's kind of like you're fueling the fire of being like, "Damn, he's going off already alone this time. Like he's looking for idols. Wow, that sucks." And you're saying this to both people, and they're both kind of immediately realizing like, "Wow, the other person's not to be trusted." Meanwhile, the other four of us are just kind of sitting there, like seeing this happen. So we kind of, and even like the conversation I had with like Rome came up to me, or Rome was asking me like he's like, "Hey, should I like ask Saul for his shot in the dark?" And I'm like, "Could be a good plan." I knew that was going to turn terribly. Rome doesn't know how to ask people for things. He's going to just demand it, which he did, threaten as he said, or ultimatum as he says. I knew that was going to happen. I'm going to hype him up for it. Like, I want to create that divide between them because as long as they're polar opposites, they're going to gravitate towards the people that are not on the polar opposites, which is exactly what happened, which is why Saul still wanted to work with us, even though we voted out Asia. So it was intentional. There was some, some fueling of that fire, which made for a really intense rivalry between the two.
Yeah, so on that note, I mean, last question I want to ask is obviously something that you and I talked about a lot, and you even talked about it in your confessionals, is your love of that disorder, right? The ability to thrive in that chaotic environment, of course, coming from your work to the beach. And it was something that you were able to both harness and produce as well, maybe a bit to your point. Do you have any recommendation for future players in terms of handling chaos? Because to your point about the fire metaphor, if you're able to like largely able to get your hands around it, that's all well and good, but sometimes you could get burned by it, as is the case with you.
Yeah, I think know your limits of what is your limit of chaos. I thought my chaos was unending and I thought it could be an infinite amount. And, I would just be able to recognize what's going on behind the scenes. But, when there is so much happening, you're going to be left out of a conversation. That's just the case. In the case of if you're going to play it ultra safe, you're going to probably know a lot more of what's happening. However, you're not going to be making any big decisions and big moves,
Mm.
and everything's going to end up turning out in a slightly bland way. Versus if there's a lot of chaos, you might not know exactly what's going to happen, as in my case, but it's a lot more fun.
Well, that's the thing. To that note, you definitely spiced up these past couple of votes. And listen, I wish we were, tasting the Kishan dish. It's $1 million one, but regardless, it was such a great time getting to watch you. Again, just like your general positivity and joy at playing this game, even through this devastating blindside, was so palpable, even through that swimming moment when to that point you're just like, I could play it super safe and sit out the challenge, or I could just test myself, see how confident I was, and try this out. And I'm so happy you tried out for the show, tried out so much stuff on the island, and sat down and talked with me today about all of it. I always relish the opportunity for us to chat.
No, I appreciate it. I did Survivor to have fun, and I had an insane amount of fun. So there's no regrets. It's all joy, it's all smiles and all positivity because that's what the experience was. Even though it wasn't an ending I wanted, it was such an amazing time.
Amazing. Well, all the best to you and yours. Kishan, thank you as always for the great chat and looking forward to seeing what happens next.
All righty, I appreciate it.
Yep, have a good one. Bye bye.